Hi, welcome back to NorthumbriaCommunity.com. I'm here this afternoon with Andy on Holy Island, and we want to talk about two things. First is the genesis of the Northumbrian Office, and the second thing is the genesis of the Northumbria Rule. So I'm going to ask Andy to kick off and just give us a broad picture of how the Northumbrian Office developed in book form.
My first recollection would be that we had this particular book years ago when I was working at Marygate House, and Roland Walls from the Community of Transfiguration at Roslin used to try and look after us and keep us in line. At one stage he set us a number of passages that we were to read regularly and pray, and so we wrote them out in a book, and some of those will be quite familiar to people. There's Psalm 27,
That's Roland's big deal, wasn't it?
Colossians 3, there's Matthew 12, there's the Charles de Foucault Prayer of Abandonment. And then what happened was that whenever there was significant things after that for us on the island, I ended up writing them in to this same book. So that began to develop, so that when we finally were putting together, say, the meditations for the office book, this was already the resource book that we came back to. We used to laughingly call this book the office. One Easter workshop, as we were going to be at Grange Road at Jarrow, John said, I think it's time we put together an office, morning, midday, evening prayer, and that we could test drive over the Easter workshop.
When was it?
1986, did we just say?
I can't remember.
Let me just check. 1992 it was. So that was as we were approaching Easter of 1992. John said that, and I know we sat down, and in one evening we put together that morning, midday and evening prayer, and we did it including writing the song for the one thing I have asked of the Lord.
I remember that, yeah.
It included us deciding that we wanted to keep the these and thous for the Lord's Prayer, and then all the other things that fell together for the midday prayer were able to be done with the these and thous as well, because a couple of the let nothing disturb thee and the teach us, dear Lord, had the these and thous in it, and we didn't want to lose the music. Okay.
Yeah, Andy mentions Roland Walls, who was a great friend and supporter of ours, Brother Roland. And when we were thinking about putting together the office book, well, I always used to go up and ask Roland for advice. And he gave us some pretty good advice. And this is it. Make sure the prayers are part of your story. That was number one. Keep it Trinitarian and theologically substantial. That was number two. And perhaps the best bit of advice for Andy was keep it short and keep it simple. So that's the three bits of advice that Roland gave us. And those thoughts were in the back of my mind when we were starting to gather stuff and put it together. And I think the first thing is, make sure the prayers are part of your story. We really were going through prayers probably over a 14-year period, because Andy talks about the book from Holy Island, but we also had the prayers that we were collecting during our time of learning to live in community together, just a small group of us, and also through the Easter workshops. You agree with that, Andy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it starts with that putting together that morning, midday and evening prayer as an example of something that we could test drive over the few days that we were together.
Yeah.
And we weren't really expecting the kind of response that we got, which was from our own folk, and they just sort of said, when we asked them what did they make of the morning, midday and evening prayer, they said, when can we have it and be allowed to take it away so we can use it all the time? And I think we thought that everything we were doing was provisional or an example of something that could happen. And to our surprise, it's not grown stale. You know, all these years later, it still feels as alive and as provocative as it did then.
I think the important thing all the time for us, we were writing stuff for ourselves.
Yes.
We weren't writing for a market or thinking we were going to be... It was actually going to go anywhere. We were saying, we need to do this.
But you were, even then though, John, you were saying it's important that we do something that is specifically Trinitarian. You were saying those things, and you may well have been thinking in terms of what Roland had said to you, but I remember you saying that at this particular juncture it's important that what we're saying is spiritual but not vague, that it is actually rooted.
Yeah. Just some fundamental things about the office. We call it the Northumbrian Office because it actually evolved in Northumbria, and it's got a distinctly Celtic feel to it, not because we thought let's write something Celtic. It's because we live in Northumbria, and Northumbria is Celtic, and we live in a context of the Northumbrian saints, and that environment is part of us. It's what we live, it's what we breathe. So there wasn't any let's style this Celtic. It just came out with a Celtic flavour because that's our environment that we live in. We live in the Isle of the Saints, don't we?
Well, I mean that's been our story. I know for me, my story was a call to Holy Island, and I was trying to find out what was distinctive about Holy Island, what made it special. And I think other people who were called back to this area around the island, around the area of the Nether Springs as well, we were still trying to find out what was there rooted in the physical history and that was tangible. And it did go back to those Celtic roots.
I think the other thing that is important on this theme of make sure the prayers are part of your story, you know, there seems to be a tendency nowadays that people just sit down and write an office book. And our office book came out of our life together, and it's the memory stones of 14 years. We didn't just sit down and say, these are canny prayers, let's put these in. We looked at prayers that actually had significant meaning for us throughout our journey. And when you look in the office book, you can hear voices, can't you? You can hear voices, you can tell stories of the people who contributed because they were part of what we were about and what we were doing.
Those people as well were a dispersed people. There was this mixture of people who were local and dropped in, and the people who came from further afield. There was always that mixture, so that Easter workshops became a stimulus for all kinds of creativity, but also a sharing of vision. And there was a kind of vulnerability and brokenness as a common denominator right from the beginning too.
You're talking about people who weren't here with us and coming from a distance. I think about Peter. May the peace of the Lord.
Well, Peter wasn't even specifically with us in terms of community.
No.
He was somebody who crossed paths with both of us, you know, from his beginnings here on the island in Aidensweek in, I would say that would be 76, and then was at college with you as well. But that song, that prayer has been something that has meant a lot to loads of people. That may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you.
I still use it in the Eucharist many times.